The moon never forgets the heart that chooses kindness when the whole world chooses pride. The words echoed through Emily Carter's mind as cold rain slipped from the towering pines and soaked the faded blue dress clinging to her trembling frame. Only minutes earlier, she had stood beneath the silver glow of the moon festival with every hopeful heart in her pack gathered around the sacred stone circle. Young alphas had proudly stepped forward to recognize their destined partners, while families celebrated beneath strings of lanterns swaying in the night breeze. Emily had waited quietly, her hands folded together, refusing to let herself believe the whispers that had followed her since childhood. Broken Omega, weak blood, the girl no alpha would ever choose. She had promised herself that tonight would be different. Instead, silence had answered her. One by one, every unmated alpha turned away. Some avoided her eyes. Others looked straight through her as though she had never existed. A few chuckled under their breath, and the laughter spread across the clearing like a cold wind. Even the elders lowered their eyes with quiet disappointment. Emily forced herself to smile, but it shattered the moment someone muttered that even the moon goddess must have forgotten her name. She stepped backward before anyone could see the tears gathering in her eyes. The celebration continued without her as music rose into the evening sky and couples disappeared into warm circles of dancing light. No one noticed the lonely Omega walking toward the dark edge of the forest. Or perhaps they noticed and simply did not care. The rain grew heavier as Emily followed an old trail leading into the ancient woods beyond pack territory. Branches swayed overhead, dripping silver beneath the full moon that appeared and vanished behind drifting clouds. She wrapped her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders, trying to ignore the ache growing inside her chest. It wasn't the rejection that hurt the most. It was realizing how easily everyone had accepted that she deserved it. Her grandmother had once told her that forests remembered every kindness ever given within their roots. Emily wished people could do the same. A distant rumble of thunder rolled across the mountains. She paused beside a fallen cedar nearly 3 feet across, taking shelter beneath its broad trunk while catching her breath. Everything around her smelled of wet earth, pine needles, and fresh rain. The quiet should have been comforting. Instead, it made the emptiness inside her feel even larger. Then she heard it, barely louder than the rain itself. A tiny whimper. Emily lifted her head, listening carefully. For a moment, she wondered if grief was playing tricks on her. The sound came again, soft and frightened, somewhere deeper among the thick ferns ahead. Without thinking, she stepped off the trail. Damp leaves brushed against her ankles as she carefully pushed aside tangled branches. The tiny cry repeated, weaker this time. Her heartbeat quickened. Whatever was making that sound was alone. The forest suddenly felt less lonely than the village she had just left behind. She followed the faint cries through a patch of wildflowers bent beneath the rain until she reached a narrow clearing hidden beneath ancient oaks. There, beside the twisted roots of a weathered tree, lay the smallest white wolf pup she had ever seen. Its snowy fur was soaked from the storm, making it appear even smaller than it truly was. One tiny paw was caught beneath broken branches, and its bright blue eyes searched the darkness with exhausted fear. The little creature tried to stand, stumbled, and let out another weak cry before collapsing into the wet grass. Emily slowly knelt a few feet away, careful not to frighten it. The pup's ears flattened, but instead of growling, it simply looked at her with heartbreaking trust, as though it had been waiting for someone to come. Emily felt something inside her soften. For the first time that night, the pain of the festival faded behind a single simple thought. No one should have to face the darkness alone. Emily lowered herself onto the damp forest floor until she was close enough for the tiny white wolf pup to see that her empty hands carried no threat. Rain continued to fall through the thick canopy in soft silver threads, gathering on her eyelashes and sliding down her cheeks. The little creature watched every movement with wide blue eyes that seemed far too thoughtful for such a small animal. Its tiny chest rose and fell in quick, uneven breaths as it struggled to free its trapped paw without success. Emily spoke in the same gentle voice her grandmother had always used with frightened birds during winter storms. "It is all right. I am not going to hurt you." The pup tilted its head as though listening carefully to every word. Slowly, Emily reached toward the broken branches pinning its leg. The wolf flinched at first, then became perfectly still. She carefully lifted one branch after another, taking great care not to move too quickly. When the last piece of wood rolled aside, the little paw slipped free. The pup tried to stand immediately, but its legs trembled beneath its tiny body, and it collapsed back into the wet grass with a quiet whimper. Emily felt her heart tighten. "Easy," she whispered. "You do not have to be brave every second." She slipped off her shawl despite the cold rain and wrapped the small wolf inside the soft fabric. The pup blinked several times before nestling into the warmth, its tiny nose pressing gently against her hand. Emily smiled without realizing it. Nobody had looked at her with such trust in years. She examined the little paw carefully. It was swollen, but thankfully not badly injured. A few scratches covered its snowy fur, likely from struggling against the fallen branches. Nearby, she spotted broad green leaves her grandmother had once shown her during long walks through these same woods. They were known for soothing soreness and keeping small wounds clean. Emily gathered several leaves, rinsed them with rainwater collected inside a smooth stone hollow, and gently wrapped them around the tiny paw using a narrow strip torn from the edge of her dress. The pup watched every movement without pulling away. When she finished, it cautiously placed weight on the injured foot. It was still unsteady, but much better than before. A faint tail wag followed, so small Emily almost missed it. A quiet laugh escaped her lips, surprising even herself. The sound felt unfamiliar after so many months of silence. "There you are," she whispered. "You still know how to hope." Thunder rolled farther away now, leaving only the steady rhythm of rain tapping across the leaves overhead. Night settled deeper over the ancient forest. Emily knew returning to the pack was impossible. Even if she walked back now, the festival would be ending, and she would only face more pity or cold silence. Looking around the clearing, she noticed a large hollow beneath the roots of an old oak tree where the ground remained mostly dry. It was not much, but it would shelter them until morning. Carrying the tiny wolf close against her chest, she crossed the clearing and settled beneath the enormous roots. She gathered fallen pine needles into a soft bed and tucked the shawl carefully around the little animal. The pup circled once before curling against her side with complete trust. Emily leaned back against the ancient tree, listening to the steady heartbeat she could feel through the blanket. It reminded her that even the smallest life carried remarkable courage. Hours passed quietly. The rain softened into a gentle drizzle while moonlight slowly returned between drifting clouds. Somewhere high above, an owl called across the valley. Emily found herself talking softly to the sleeping pup simply because the silence no longer felt empty. She told it about growing up with her grandmother, about learning the names of wildflowers instead of hunting, about believing that kindness mattered even when nobody rewarded it. The tiny wolf remained asleep, breathing peacefully against her arm, but somehow Emily felt heard for the first time in a very long while. Just before dawn, the pup suddenly lifted its head. Its ears stood alert as it stared into the dark forest beyond the clearing. Emily followed its gaze but saw nothing except endless rows of quiet trees disappearing into pale morning mist. The little wolf gave one soft cry unlike any sound it had made before. It was neither frightened nor lonely. It sounded almost hopeful. Miles away, beyond rivers and mountains, inside the towering stone walls of Blackwood Castle, a brilliant crystal resting in the center of the royal hall awakened with a pulse of silver light. Every guard standing watch turned toward it in stunned silence as ancient runes carved into the floor began glowing one after another. An elderly advisor looked toward the highest balcony where a tall figure dressed in black stood watching the fading night. His expression changed instantly. He had waited 3 endless days for this impossible sign. Without taking his eyes from the glowing crystal, King Rowan Blackwood spoke only 4 calm words that echoed through the silent hall. "My son is alive." Morning arrived quietly, painting the ancient forest with ribbons of golden sunlight that filtered through towering pines and settled gently across the moss-covered ground. Emily Carter opened her eyes to the peaceful melody of songbirds welcoming the new day, and for a brief moment she forgot the rejection, the laughter, and the lonely walk that had led her into the wilderness. Then she felt a warm weight pressed against her side. The tiny white wolf pup was still sleeping, wrapped snugly inside her faded blue shawl, its small nose tucked beneath its fluffy tail. A smile slowly appeared across Emily's face. It was the first genuine smile she had worn in longer than she could remember. The little wolf stirred, stretching its tiny legs before blinking sleepy blue eyes up at her. For several seconds, they simply looked at each other. Then the pup gave an eager little bark and climbed clumsily into her lap, placing one soft paw against her arm as though greeting an old friend. Emily laughed softly. "Good morning to you too," she whispered, gently scratching behind its ears. The pup leaned happily into her hand, closing its eyes with complete trust. Whatever fear it had carried during the storm had disappeared. Emily carefully removed the leafy wrap around its injured paw and examined it. The swelling had already gone down far more than she expected. "You heal quickly," she murmured. "That is wonderful." The little wolf proudly placed weight on all four paws before taking several uncertain steps across the bed of pine needles. Its balance was still clumsy, but every step looked stronger than the last. It suddenly bounced toward a bright yellow butterfly drifting between shafts of morning light, only to tumble harmlessly into a patch of soft moss. Emily could not stop smiling as the tiny creature looked around with confused dignity before pretending nothing had happened. "You are determined, I will give you that," she said, helping it back onto its feet. Hunger soon reminded Emily that neither of them had eaten since the previous afternoon. She searched the nearby woods, recognizing familiar berry bushes and a clear spring her grandmother had shown her years ago. After carefully checking that the berries were safe, she gathered a handful inside large maple leaves and carried fresh water back, using a broad piece of smooth bark shaped like a shallow bowl. The pup sniffed curiously before happily lapping the cool spring water. It attempted to nibble the berries as well, making an adorably puzzled expression after tasting one. Emily chuckled. "Perhaps berries are not your favorite breakfast." She searched a little farther and found several edible mushrooms growing beneath fallen logs. While she could not prepare a proper meal without a fire, she remembered another lesson from her grandmother. Certain forest herbs had gentle scents that often attracted rabbits and other small woodland creatures. Emily crushed a few leaves between her fingers, letting their fragrance drift through the air while remaining perfectly still beside a quiet clearing. After nearly 20 minutes, a curious rabbit cautiously emerged from nearby brush. Emily smiled, but made no effort to chase it. The rabbit paused, twitched its nose toward the little wolf, then calmly hopped away again. The pup watched with fascinated eyes, but stayed exactly where Emily had quietly placed a hand upon its back. "See," she whispered. "Not everything has to be chased." The little wolf looked up at her as if trying very hard to understand. A gentle breeze carried the scent of pine and wildflowers through the clearing. For the first time in many years, Emily realized she felt completely at peace. There were no cruel whispers here, no judging eyes, no expectations she could never satisfy. Only sunlight, birdsong, and a tiny companion who seemed to value her presence without asking for anything in return. As the morning passed, the pup refused to wander more than a few feet away from her. Whenever Emily picked flowers or gathered fresh herbs, the little wolf faithfully followed behind, occasionally stopping to investigate colorful leaves, curious squirrels, or dancing butterflies. Each discovery filled it with wide-eyed wonder, and somehow that innocent curiosity slowly awakened something inside Emily that rejection had nearly extinguished. Hope. She found herself talking almost constantly, telling stories from childhood and giving names to every unusual tree and flower they encountered. The pup listened with surprising attention, tilting its head whenever she spoke, as though every word mattered. By early afternoon, they reached a narrow stream where crystal-clear water flowed over smooth stones polished by countless seasons. Emily sat on the bank and dipped her tired feet into the cool current. The tiny wolf eagerly splashed after floating leaves, sending sparkling drops of water into the air before racing back to her with playful excitement. Without warning, it leaped directly into her lap, soaking both of them. Emily burst into laughter so bright and carefree that even the forest seemed to grow quieter to listen. The pup wagged its tail furiously, delighted by the sound. Far beyond the peaceful woods, however, another story was unfolding. Riders wearing the silver crest of Blackwood Kingdom crossed mountain passes and ancient bridges without stopping to rest. Royal messengers carried sealed orders to every border outpost. Search parties spread across forests, rivers, and forgotten valleys with one purpose alone. They were searching for a missing heir whose disappearance had shaken an entire kingdom. None of them knew that the little prince they sought had fallen asleep once again beside a kind-hearted Omega who believed she had simply rescued a lonely wolf pup from the storm. And hidden among the tallest trees overlooking the quiet stream, a silent figure cloaked in dark green watched Emily and the playful little wolf from a respectful distance. The stranger did not step forward or reveal his presence. Instead, he quietly touched 2 fingers to the silver emblem beneath his cloak before disappearing into the shadows, carrying news that would soon change the fate of everyone involved. The peaceful rhythm of the forest continued, untouched by the storm gathering far beyond its ancient trees. Emily Carter sat beside the clear stream while the tiny white wolf pup chased drifting leaves across the shallow water, splashing happily each time one escaped its reach. She had never imagined that a single day could feel so different from the life she had left behind. Yesterday, she had been the forgotten Omega no one wanted beside them at the Moon Festival. Today she was simply a young woman sharing quiet laughter with a small companion who greeted every sunrise as though the world still deserved to be trusted. She gently brushed a loose strand of brown hair behind her ear and watched the little wolf race through a patch of wildflowers before proudly returning with a bright blue feather held carefully between its tiny teeth. Emily accepted the gift with a warm smile. "Is this for me?" she asked softly. The pup wagged its tail with such enthusiasm that she could not help laughing again. She tucked the feather into the edge of her shawl. "Then I will treasure it." Miles away, inside the towering walls of Blackwood Castle, there was no laughter. The enormous royal hall echoed with hurried footsteps as advisors, captains, and messengers crossed polished stone floors beneath banners carrying the ancient crest of the Blackwood line. Every face reflected the same quiet urgency. At the center of the hall, the silver crystal continued glowing with a steady pulse that had not faded since sunrise. Elder Nathaniel rested both hands upon his carved staff while studying the ancient light. "The bond remains strong," he said calmly. "The young prince is alive, unharmed, and no longer alone." Across the chamber, King Rowan Blackwood stood before a wall-sized map marked with rivers, forests, and mountain ranges stretching across the northern kingdoms. His silver eyes remained fixed on the section surrounding the ancient evergreen forest. "Expand the search another 20 miles in every direction," he ordered. His voice was steady, yet every person present understood the deep concern hidden beneath that calm tone. "No village is to be disturbed. No innocent traveler is to be frightened. We search with respect. Whoever has found my son must not become our enemy through fear." The royal captain bowed immediately. "Yes, Your Majesty." Another messenger hurried into the hall and knelt. "Scouts report fresh tracks near the eastern streams. The trail is faint, but it appears the young prince has remained with a single companion since yesterday." The room fell silent. Nathaniel slowly smiled. "Then destiny continues to move exactly as the old prophecy foretold." Rowan looked toward the elderly advisor. "Do not speak of prophecy until my son is safely home." Nathaniel inclined his head respectfully. "As you wish, Your Majesty." Far from the castle, Emily knew nothing about the kingdom searching tirelessly across the wilderness. She and the little wolf followed a winding trail lined with towering maples whose leaves shimmered gently in the afternoon breeze. Every few minutes the pup would race ahead before stopping to make sure she was still following. If she deliberately slowed her pace, it immediately hurried back, circling her feet until she smiled and continued walking. "You really do not like being alone, do you?" Emily whispered. The little wolf pressed against her leg as if answering yes. She reached down to stroke its soft white fur. "Neither do I." They eventually arrived at a small meadow surrounded by blooming wildflowers that swayed beneath warm sunlight. Butterflies floated lazily through the air while honeybees drifted from blossom to blossom. Emily settled beneath a broad oak tree and began weaving tiny flowers into a simple crown, something her grandmother had taught her during peaceful spring afternoons long ago. The pup watched with intense curiosity until Emily gently placed the finished flower crown between its fluffy ears. The little wolf froze for a second, then proudly trotted across the meadow as though it had just been crowned ruler of the forest itself. Emily laughed so brightly that nearby birds fluttered from the branches overhead. Hidden beyond the edge of the meadow, the cloaked observer from earlier remained perfectly still among the trees. He watched the scene unfold with quiet amazement. The missing prince, whose disappearance had shaken the strongest kingdom in the north, was not frightened. He was playing, smiling, trusting an unknown Omega with complete confidence. The scout carefully removed a small silver pendant from beneath his cloak. It glowed faintly, responding to the prince's presence. He whispered into the enchanted stone, "Confirmation. The heir is safe. He remains with a young Omega named Emily Carter. She has shown nothing except kindness." The pendant's light faded, carrying the message across an impossible distance. Inside Blackwood Castle, Rowan closed his eyes briefly as the report reached him through ancient royal magic. Relief softened his expression for only a heartbeat before determination returned. "Prepare my horse," he said quietly. "I will bring my son home myself." Outside the castle, dozens of riders assembled beneath the royal banner, their armor gleaming beneath the afternoon sun. No horns sounded. No army marched. The king had given one clear command above all others. They would travel swiftly, but they would travel with peace. Deep within the forest, completely unaware that the most powerful alpha king alive was now riding toward her, Emily lifted the tiny wolf into her arms as the first cool breeze of evening swept through the trees. The little pup rested its head against her shoulder with complete trust, while somewhere far ahead, fate quietly shortened the distance between two lives that had been moving toward each other long before either of them knew it. The golden light of late afternoon slowly melted into the softer colors of evening as Emily Carter and the tiny white wolf wandered deeper into evergreen forest. The little pup stayed close to her now, no longer racing far ahead as it had earlier. Every few minutes it glanced over its shoulder, its bright blue eyes scanning the quiet woods as though listening for something only it could hear. Emily noticed the change immediately. She knelt beside it and gently rubbed behind its ears. "What is it? Did you hear another animal?" The pup did not answer with its usual playful bark. Instead, it leaned against her hand before looking toward the western ridge where long shadows stretched between the towering pines. A cool breeze drifted through the forest carrying unfamiliar scents that Emily could not recognize. The peaceful songs of birds gradually faded until the woods became unusually quiet. Even the squirrels disappeared into the branches overhead. Emily remembered something her grandmother often said. When the forest becomes silent, it is paying attention. She slowly stood and looked around. Everything appeared normal, yet an uneasy feeling settled quietly inside her heart. "Perhaps we should find another place to rest before nightfall," she whispered. The little wolf immediately pressed against her leg as though agreeing. They followed a narrow deer trail winding between moss-covered stones and ancient trees. Emily carefully watched the fading sunlight, hoping to find another sheltered hollow before darkness arrived. After nearly half a mile, she reached a small clearing surrounded by thick bushes covered with ripe blackberries. Nearby stood a weathered stone outcrop, forming a natural shelter beneath its broad overhang. It was dry, protected from the wind, and close to a clear stream. "This will do nicely," Emily said with relief. She gathered fallen branches, fresh pine needles, and broad leaves to create a comfortable place for the little wolf to sleep. The pup happily circled the small nest several times before curling into a fluffy white ball. Emily smiled and collected a few berries for herself while filling a shallow wooden bowl with cool spring water. As twilight settled across the forest, she quietly hummed an old lullaby her grandmother used to sing during rainy evenings. The little wolf slowly closed its eyes, its breathing becoming calm and peaceful. Emily leaned against the stone wall, believing for the first time that perhaps tomorrow would be kinder than yesterday. Then a distant voice drifted through the trees. "Did you see the tracks over here?" Another voice answered somewhere beyond the clearing. "They disappear near the stream." Emily immediately became still. The little wolf's ears lifted at once. She carefully peeked through the bushes and spotted 3 travelers walking slowly along the opposite side of the stream. They wore heavy cloaks, carried walking staffs, and appeared to be searching for something. None of them looked threatening, yet instinct urged Emily to remain hidden. She had learned long ago that strangers rarely brought good news to forgotten omegas. The men paused near the water. One of them bent down and studied several tiny paw prints pressed into the damp earth. "Fresh," he said quietly. "Whatever made these tracks cannot be far." Emily gently pulled the little wolf closer without making a sound. The pup looked toward the travelers with unusual concentration, but remained perfectly quiet. After several long moments, the strangers continued downstream and gradually disappeared behind the trees. Emily released the breath she had been holding. "Perhaps they were only passing through," she whispered, although she was not completely convinced. Night settled fully over the forest. A blanket of stars slowly appeared above the dark canopy, while a bright full moon rose beyond the eastern hills. The little wolf suddenly became restless again. It climbed into Emily's lap and looked toward the sky with wide, thoughtful eyes. Moonlight touched its snowy fur, making it shimmer almost like polished silver. Emily blinked. For just a heartbeat, she thought tiny glowing markings appeared beneath the fur around its neck before fading again. She frowned gently. "That must have been the moonlight playing tricks on my eyes." The pup looked back at her and softly touched its nose against her cheek. Emily laughed quietly. "You really do know how to make someone forget their worries." She wrapped the faded blue shawl around both of them as the night air turned cooler. Hidden high above the clearing, perched silently among the branches of an enormous pine, the Royal Scout watched everything with patient eyes. He had followed from a safe distance all afternoon, careful never to disturb either the young woman or the missing prince. Seeing the glowing markings appear beneath the moonlight, he quietly pressed 2 fingers against the enchanted pendant beneath his cloak once again. A faint silver light answered his touch. "His Highness remains safe," he whispered. "But the moon mark has begun to awaken. We are running out of time." Hundreds of miles away, King Rowan Blackwood guided his midnight black horse through the forest trails without slowing. Beside him rode only a handful of his most trusted companions. The king had deliberately left the larger search parties behind. He wanted no frightened villagers, no unnecessary panic, and no risk that the kind stranger sheltering his son would mistake an army for a threat. Nathaniel rode quietly at his side before finally speaking. "Tomorrow night will be the second full moon since the prince disappeared." Rowan kept his eyes fixed on the dark trail ahead. "I know. If the moon mark fully awakens before you reach him." Nathaniel allowed the sentence to fade. Rowan answered with calm certainty that carried the quiet strength of a ruler who had never stopped believing. "Then I will reach him before the moon has the chance." The second sunrise in the forest arrived beneath a sky washed in pale gold, but the peaceful feeling that had surrounded Emily Carter the day before had quietly disappeared. She woke before the birds began singing, sensing that something had changed long before she could explain why. Beside her, the tiny white wolf pup was already awake, sitting at the edge of the stone shelter with its bright blue eyes fixed toward the eastern woods. It did not bark or play. It simply watched, as though waiting for someone it could almost sense. Emily wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and joined the little wolf at the entrance. Cool morning air carried the scent of pine, fresh earth, and distant rain. "You have been listening all morning," she whispered, gently resting a hand against its soft back. "Do you think someone is coming for you?" The pup slowly looked up at her before pressing its head against her arm with quiet affection. Emily smiled sadly. "If you belong to someone, I hope they have been searching for you." The thought surprised her. Only 2 days earlier she had wished never to return to the pack that had forgotten her so easily. Now she found herself hoping this tiny companion had a family that loved it enough to keep looking. After gathering fresh water from the nearby stream, Emily noticed something unusual. Small silver flowers growing beside the bank had opened all at once, even though they normally bloomed only after sunset. She knelt to examine them more closely, brushing her fingertips across the delicate petals. Grandmother always said nature sometimes welcomes important visitors before people know they are coming. The little wolf quietly walked beside her, but every few steps it paused, lifting its nose toward the breeze. Around midday they reached a wide meadow where warm sunlight spilled across endless waves of green grass. Emily sat beneath a broad maple tree while the pup wandered among the wildflowers. Suddenly it stopped moving. Its ears stood upright. A strange silver glow slowly shimmered beneath its snowy fur, brighter than anything Emily had noticed the night before. She immediately stood. "Are you hurt?" she asked with concern. The little wolf looked toward her, but instead of fear there was only confusion in its gentle eyes. The glowing markings spread across its neck and shoulders like streams of moonlight flowing beneath soft white fur. Tiny sparks drifted into the air before disappearing on the breeze. Emily carefully knelt beside it, placing one reassuring hand upon its head. "It is all right. Whatever this is, you are not alone." The moment her fingers touched its fur, the silver light became brighter. A warm breeze swept across the meadow, although the surrounding trees remained perfectly still. Wildflowers bent gently outward as though making room for something unseen. The little wolf gave one soft cry, not in pain, but in surprise. Emily stepped back as the light slowly surrounded the tiny body like a glowing cocoon. She raised one arm to shield her eyes. The air filled with countless silver particles floating quietly around them. Time itself seemed to slow. The little wolf's small shape shimmered inside the gentle light. Emily watched in complete silence as the glow gradually faded. Standing where the tiny pup had been only seconds before was a young boy no older than 5 years old. He had soft white hair that caught the sunlight like fresh snow and bright blue eyes she recognized immediately. A silver cloak embroidered with delicate royal patterns now rested across his small shoulders as though it had always belonged there. The child blinked several times before looking down at his own hands with innocent wonder. Then he lifted his eyes toward Emily. "You stayed," he whispered softly. Emily could not speak. Her heartbeat echoed in her ears as she stared at the child who only moments ago had been the little wolf she had carried, protected, and comforted through the forest. Every memory from the past 2 days rushed through her mind at once. The playful splashing in the stream, the flower crown, the quiet naps beneath ancient trees. None of it made sense anymore, yet somehow all of it did. The little boy smiled with the same warmth she had seen every morning in those familiar blue eyes. Without hesitation, he walked toward her and wrapped his small arms around her waist. "Thank you," he said. "I knew you would not leave me." Emily slowly returned the embrace, still struggling to understand what she was seeing. "Who are you?" she whispered. Before the child could answer, the peaceful meadow changed. Horses approached from beyond the distant tree line. Their steady hoofbeats rolled gently across the open field. Emily turned instinctively, placing herself protectively beside the young boy. A line of riders emerged from the forest wearing polished silver cloaks marked with the crest of a great wolf beneath a full moon. They stopped several yards away without raising a single weapon or making a threatening move. One by one, every rider quietly stepped down from their horses. The elderly advisor standing near the front lowered his head with visible relief. Even the royal guard smiled as tears quietly filled their eyes. The young boy looked toward them, then back at Emily before taking her hand. His small voice carried across the silent meadow with perfect innocence. "They found us." The little boy held tightly to Emily Carter's hand as the riders remained perfectly still across the meadow, their respectful silence speaking louder than any shouted command ever could. The breeze carried the scent of pine through the tall grass, while sunlight shimmered across polished silver armor. Emily's heart raced with uncertainty. She had expected strangers searching for a lost child. She had never imagined they would arrive dressed like the royal guard from old stories her grandmother used to tell beside the fireplace. The elderly advisor stepped forward first, stopping several yards away before lowering himself onto one knee. Every guard behind him immediately followed. No one reached for a weapon. No one spoke without permission. They simply bowed toward the small, white-haired boy with unmistakable reverence. Emily looked down in disbelief. The child smiled shyly before squeezing her hand a little tighter. "They always do that," he whispered, as though explaining something completely ordinary. Before Emily could answer, another sound drifted across the meadow. Slow, steady hoofbeats unlike the hurried approach of the other riders. Every guard immediately stood and turned toward the forest edge. The atmosphere changed in an instant. Respect deepened into absolute loyalty. Birds resting in the nearby branches suddenly took flight as a magnificent black horse emerged from between the towering pines. Upon its back rode a man whose quiet presence seemed to command the very air around him. His dark coat moved gently with the breeze, and sunlight caught the silver woven into its collar. His hair, dark as midnight, framed a face both strong and calm, while his clear silver eyes searched the meadow with unwavering focus. Emily had never seen anyone who carried authority so effortlessly. The horse stopped several feet away. For one long heartbeat, the rider did not move. His gaze rested entirely upon the young boy standing safely beside Emily. Relief softened his expression so subtly that only someone watching closely would have noticed. The little boy suddenly let go of Emily's hand. "Father," he called happily before running across the grass. The tall man stepped down from his horse just as the child reached him. He knelt immediately, gathering the boy into a warm embrace that carried none of the distance of a king and all of the love of a father who had feared losing his son forever. He closed his eyes briefly while resting his forehead against the child's white hair. "Welcome home, Noah," he said quietly. "I have been searching for you." Noah smiled brightly. "I knew you would come." After several peaceful moments, the child gently took his father's hand and turned back toward Emily. Without hesitation, he walked her direction again, leading the tall man beside him. Emily instinctively lowered her eyes, uncertain whether she should step back or kneel. Before she could decide, Noah stopped directly in front of her and wrapped one arm around her hand once more. "Father," he said proudly, "this is Emily. She found me in the forest. She gave me water, fixed my paw, shared her food, and stayed with me every night. She never left me alone." The meadow fell completely silent. King Rowan Blackwood looked at Emily for the first time. There was no anger in his silver eyes, no suspicion, and no cold judgment. Instead, she saw gratitude so sincere that it left her speechless. Rowan placed one hand gently over his heart before inclining his head toward her in quiet respect. "Emily Carter," he said, his calm voice carrying across the meadow, "you protected the person most precious to me when you had every reason to protect only yourself. For that, you have my deepest gratitude." Emily blinked in surprise. I only helped a frightened little wolf who needed someone." Noah laughed softly. "I told you she did not know." Several guards smiled warmly at one another. Even Elder Nathaniel's eyes shone with quiet satisfaction. Rowan glanced affectionately toward his son before looking back at Emily. "That is exactly why your kindness carries such great value. You expected nothing in return." Emily lowered her gaze, suddenly remembering her torn dress, her worn boots, and the rejection she had fled only 2 days earlier. "I did not do anything special," she whispered. "Anyone would have done the same." Nathaniel gently smiled. "Not everyone would have stopped. Not everyone would have stayed." Noah nodded eagerly. "She even made me a flower crown." Emily felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment as several guards chuckled kindly. The little prince reached into the pocket of his silver cloak and carefully pulled out the tiny blue feather she had tucked there the day before. "I kept it because Emily said gifts should always be remembered." Rowan accepted the feather with surprising care before returning it to his son's pocket. His expression softened once again. "Then it shall remain with you." A warm breeze crossed the meadow, carrying away the last traces of fear that had lingered since the riders first appeared. Emily slowly realized that no one was treating her like the forgotten Omega she had always believed herself to be. Here, beneath the open sky, surrounded by the most powerful kingdom she had ever heard about, they were looking at her with something she had almost forgotten existed: respect. The journey to Blackwood Castle began beneath a sky of soft afternoon light. Yet Emily Carter still found it difficult to believe that everything around her was real. She rode in a comfortable carriage provided by the royal guard, but every few minutes little Prince Noah happily climbed down from his father's horse to sit beside her instead. He insisted on pointing out every unusual bird, every waterfall sparkling between the trees, and every family of deer grazing peacefully in distant meadows. His laughter filled the forest road with warmth that seemed to erase the loneliness Emily had carried for so many years. King Rowan rode only a short distance ahead, occasionally looking back to make certain his son remained smiling and safe. Each time Noah waved excitedly toward him, Rowan answered with the smallest smile before continuing forward. Emily quietly noticed those moments. They reminded her that behind every crown was simply a father grateful to have his child home again. By sunset, the towering walls of Blackwood Castle rose above the surrounding forests like something from an old legend. Massive stone towers reached toward the evening sky, while silver banners danced gently in the breeze. As the gates slowly opened, hundreds of castle staff lined the entrance courtyard. Emily immediately lowered her eyes, expecting attention she did not know how to receive. Instead, every servant, knight, healer, and advisor respectfully bowed as Prince Noah passed through the gates. Then something completely unexpected happened. The young prince stopped walking, turned around, and hurried back toward Emily. Without hesitation, he slipped his small hand into hers before continuing toward the castle. The entire courtyard watched the scene unfold in complete silence. Nobody questioned him. Nobody objected. Several elderly servants quietly smiled at one another. Inside the grand hall, warm golden light reflected from polished marble floors while enormous windows welcomed the last rays of the setting sun. Emily had never imagined such beauty could exist. Paintings of former kings lined the walls, and fresh flowers filled the air with a gentle fragrance. Yet despite all the splendor surrounding her, she remained most aware of the tiny hand still holding hers. Noah refused to let go. Elder Nathaniel approached carrying several ancient scrolls before stopping beside Rowan. "Your Majesty, the council has gathered as requested." Rowan nodded once before turning toward Emily. "There is something I believe you deserve to hear." Moments later, the royal council assembled within the great chamber. Captains, advisors, healers, and scholars filled the room. Emily quietly remained near the entrance, wishing she could disappear into the background as she had always done in her old pack. But Noah gently tugged her sleeve until she stood beside him instead. Rowan addressed the council with calm authority. "During the past 2 days, while the kingdom searched every valley and mountain, my son survived because one young woman chose compassion over fear." His silver eyes briefly met Emily's. She expected no reward. She asked no questions. She simply offered kindness to someone she believed was helpless. The chamber remained silent. Nathaniel slowly stepped forward, holding an old leather-bound record. "We have confirmed her account through the prince, through our scouts, and through the ancient moon crystal itself. Every detail is true." One of the senior captains lowered his head respectfully toward Emily. "Then Blackwood Kingdom owes her a debt that cannot easily be measured." Emily immediately shook her head. "Please, I do not want anyone to owe me anything." Several council members exchanged surprised glances. Nathaniel smiled gently. "You asked for nothing. That alone tells us more about your character than any title ever could." Rowan then spoke another command. "Before discussing rewards, I ordered an investigation into Emily Carter's past." Emily looked up in surprise. She had not known anyone was asking questions about her life. A royal messenger stepped forward carrying several sealed reports. "Your Majesty, witnesses from her home pack confirm that Miss Carter lived quietly, cared for her grandmother until her passing, and spent years helping injured animals, elderly neighbors, and children despite receiving little kindness herself. Multiple accounts describe her as generous, respectful, and dependable." Another advisor added softly. "There are also reports confirming repeated public rejection and social isolation." The room grew noticeably quieter. Emily wished they would stop speaking. She had never wanted strangers discussing her life. Rowan noticed the discomfort in her expression. He raised one hand, immediately ending the reports. "That is enough." His voice remained calm, yet the entire chamber obeyed without hesitation. He looked directly at Emily. "Your past does not define your worth. Your choices do." Noah smiled brightly before wrapping both arms around Emily's hand once again. "I already knew she was good." Gentle laughter spread through the chamber. Even Rowan's expression softened. "So did I," he replied quietly. At that very moment, sunlight disappeared beyond the western mountains, and the first silver moonlight entered through the castle windows. As it touched the polished floor surrounding Emily and Noah, the ancient moon crystal standing at the center of the hall suddenly glowed brighter than anyone had seen in generations. Soft silver light slowly spread across the chamber, surrounding Emily in a peaceful radiance. Every conversation stopped. Nathaniel's eyes widened with astonishment as he whispered almost to himself, "The moon has begun to answer." The silver light filling the great hall grew warmer instead of brighter, wrapping the ancient moon crystal, Prince Noah, and Emily Carter in a peaceful glow that felt more like sunrise than magic. No wind stirred inside the chamber, yet every banner hanging from the stone walls gently swayed, as though acknowledging something far older than the kingdom itself. Emily looked around in quiet confusion. "I do not understand," she whispered. Elder Nathaniel slowly approached the crystal, his weathered hands trembling ever so slightly as he studied the shimmering light. "For centuries," he said softly, "the moon crystal has responded only to truth freely given, courage offered without expectation, and hearts untouched by pride. It has not awakened like this in generations." The council stood in respectful silence. No one questioned his words. Rowan remained beside his son, his silver eyes resting upon Emily with calm thoughtfulness rather than surprise. Noah smiled as though everything unfolding felt perfectly natural to him. He reached for Emily's hand once more, and the gentle light surrounding the crystal became steadier. Nathaniel smiled. Sometimes children recognize truth before adults learn to see it. Emily lowered her eyes. "I only helped someone who needed help," Rowan answered quietly. "That is precisely why this moment matters." He stepped toward the center of the hall until he stood beside Emily beneath the silver light. Many people show kindness when they expect recognition. Very few continue showing kindness when the world has given them none. Emily felt emotion catch in her throat. No one had ever spoken about her that way before. She had spent years believing she was invisible. Yet here she stood in the heart of the greatest kingdom in the north, not because of power or status, but because she had chosen compassion when no one was watching. Nathaniel carefully closed the ancient record in his hands. The oldest writings tell us that every generation receives one quiet opportunity to change its future. The opportunity never arrives wearing a crown. It arrives disguised as a simple choice. The chamber remained completely still as his words settled into every heart present. Noah gently tugged on Emily's sleeve. "Will you stay for dinner?" The innocent question broke the solemn silence and filled the hall with soft laughter. Emily smiled through tears she had not realized had gathered in her eyes. "If your father allows it." Noah looked immediately toward Rowan. "Please." Rowan smiled fully for the first time since returning to the castle. "I believe that is the easiest decision I have made in many days." The evening passed with warmth unlike anything Emily had ever experienced. Castle servants welcomed her not as an outsider, but as an honored guest. Noah insisted she sit beside him while he eagerly described every room in the castle and introduced her to the gardeners, the librarians, and even the elderly baker who proudly declared that the young prince had finally recovered his appetite. Everywhere Emily went, she was greeted with genuine smiles instead of suspicious whispers. She slowly realized how different respect felt from pity. Later that evening, after the castle had grown quiet beneath the moonlit sky, Emily stepped onto a balcony overlooking the endless forests she had crossed only days before. The same woods that had witnessed her greatest loneliness had also led her to the greatest surprise of her life. Footsteps approached quietly behind her. Rowan stopped beside the stone railing, allowing several peaceful moments to pass before speaking. When Noah disappeared, I believed my greatest duty was to bring the future king home. He looked toward the silver moon hanging above the distant mountains. Now I understand that the future of this kingdom depends just as much upon the values we choose to honor. Emily listened without interrupting. Rowan turned toward her. "Blackwood Castle will always welcome you. Not because you saved a prince, but because you reminded all of us that true strength begins with kindness." Emily looked toward the moon, remembering the laughter at the festival, the lonely walk into the rain, the frightened little wolf beneath the broken branches, and every quiet decision that had followed. None of those moments had felt extraordinary while she was living them. Yet together they had changed countless lives. Far below, Noah appeared in the castle garden, waving enthusiastically toward the balcony before carefully placing the tiny blue feather into a newly planted white oak sapling. Emily smiled. "What is he doing?" Rowan's eyes followed his son, creating a memory. Nathaniel's gentle voice drifted from the open doorway behind them, and perhaps planting the beginning of another story. The three of them watched in peaceful silence as moonlight settled across the young tree. Somewhere deep within evergreen forest, the same gentle breeze that had carried a frightened little wolf to a forgotten omega now whispered through ancient branches once more, as if the forest itself wished to remember that the smallest act of kindness could become the first chapter of a destiny greater than anyone could have imagined.